one of the Big Finish podcasts, they did tease at the original Three Doctors. They've been in touch with Bob Baker, and because I think somebody emailed the podcast saying, "Would you be interested in doing the original version of the Three Doctors?" Because the first Doctor had a bigger role within the story, and apparently there are plans in motion for a Big Finish version of the Three Doctors, sort of maybe the original draft, much like Return of the Cybermen. So I believe that is on the card. Thank you, Stylish One, for that wonderful little intro to Deathworld. As you can see, I have had quite a history with this release. I've been very excited for it to be released. I did a video covering the history of Deathworld, and then we had the website delay, and then Deathworld was in some sort of limbo, some sort of purgatory. And
I think the physical release is still in purgatory, actually. I believe there was some issues with the discs that's holding that one back. But today,
we'll find out whether it should stay in purgatory and limbo, or whether it should, be out there to be enjoyed. Because this is our first. This is a piece of Doctor Who history, Deathworld, because this is our what could have been celebration of the 10 years of Doctor Who. This was our first possible glimpse at a multi-Doctor story.
It's the first official idea for one, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
The first one that was under serious consideration of sorts.
And there are story beats where you can see what would lead into the Three Doctors, like the Figure of Death would later become Om, and then that would be Omega. And then this idea of bringing the Doctors together in some sort of place outside of time and space. So there are core
black hole. Yeah. Things become a bit more science fiction-y, don't they, in the Three Doctors?
Yes.
Which
Deathworld is more playing hard, fast fantasy.
So yes, this release sees Stephen Noonan as the First Doctor, Michael Troughton as the Second Doctor, Tim Treloar as the Third Doctor, joining forces to fight death itself, played by Joe Sheary. You also have alongside them Katie Manning, returning as Jo Grant, a role she's played for a good while now. Fraser Hines, in a role he's played for a little bit longer than that, as Jamie McCrimmon, and John Coleshaw as the ever-reliable Brigadier. And he's ever-reliable in this role. He's a brilliant thing there.
First of all, part one, it's very much the Brigadier's story. I feel like if his story was made in 1970, John Pertwee probably would absolutely be saying, "Hey, you need to rewrite this part because I'm barely in it and I'm the star of a show."
Yeah. The story kicks off with, well, first you've got Death and the president of Gallifrey playing a little game of chess, but it's not quite your standard game of chess. Meanwhile, Doctor's tinkering away in his lab alongside his beloved Jo Grant when, boom, there's an explosion. And suddenly, Unit HQ is under attack. Another Doctor and an old friend, Jamie McCrimmon, are wandering about. And a third, or rather First Doctor, is not too far behind them as things go sideways when Death makes his play. It's high concept stuff. It's out there. It's very Bob Baker and Dave Martin. And, that's just what's in store for part one. It goes in some interesting directions across the story as you run into some Seven Deadly Sins, some Horsemen of the Apocalypse, some other fantasy creatures, Medusa, and it goes to some wild places. But, rolling back to part one, what did you think about it?
I think part one and part two is probably where Deathworld is at its strongest. I think there's this wonderful grit to it, which I think gets eroded away very quickly in the second half.
We're completely on the same page there.
Yeah, I think that it's wonderful in the sense that it's very bleak, and you can see that Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks would not have allowed a morgue full of this fungus and dead bodies. It's very Last of Us meets some war
Mm.
games.
It
That's all.
gives me Deadly Assassin vibes in its surrealism and its execution of that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of style that it feels like the first half went for. Second half, it goes a bit mind robber, which I think Terrence Dicks certainly wouldn't have been on board for. And
Yes.
I don't think is necessarily bad, but there's definitely a bit of tonal whiplash there when you go from what you had in the first half to what you get in the second half.
Yeah, the second half becomes kind of your sort of quest. We've got to escape this realm, and I think part three's not as bad as I think part four is where the story, for me, I thought kind of crumbled
Hmm.
because it's just the Doctor and Co. wandering down this tunnel and facing off, Medusa and buying each other time so they can escape this reality and get home because of events that have happened previously. I guess it's a bit like Evil of the Daleks when you've just got Jamie wandering around the mansion. Really, that's
Hmm.
the best way I can sort of link it to a Doctor Who story.
Yeah, which is a shame when you look at how tightly written and thought out the first half feels. Like the structure of it, the way that you go introduce the different doctors and then follow them on their own paths throughout part two and see the different situations they end up
Mm.
in and how they interlink. I think it feels very tight and well thought out.
Oh
And
yeah.
then when they all come together for the second half, it just goes a bit flimsy, really. And it's hard to know where the blame quite lies for something like that. It's always a bit awkward with lost stories, isn't it? Because
This this is an interesting point I want to bring up
mm,
in a minute because this is a lost story, but this story does something a little bit different to what we would have got at the end.
oh yeah, definitely.
So
Mm.
I'll hold my thought on that because I don't know how I feel about that.
When it comes to lost stories, you've always got that awkwardness of how much can you change that then makes it inauthentic to that original vision. And so, oftentimes when stuff's maybe a bit more naff, you sort of think, well, the writer couldn't really change that because,
It's a
that would go against the original pitch. And then it suddenly no longer is that same lost story. How much can you change what you started with to the point that it's no longer what you started with?
Mhm.
How much of the second half going all weird is down to John Dorney's adaptation of Bob Baker and Dave Martin's work, and how much of it is just what Bob Baker and Dave Martin had put down originally. And yeah, I think you do raise an interesting point about how it ends and how it treats that. A few things in here that feel very much John Dorney editions rather than what would have been Bob Baker and Dave Martin's original intent.
Yeah, the ending. This is the big thing that sort of I don't know where I land on it because as somebody who has wanted Deathworld for a long time, you want it to be as intended. This try the ending for this story, what John Dorney's done is sort of shoehorned it so this and the Three Doctors can coexist. Now, John Dorney was going to do it with Return of the Cybermen, but Big Finish said no, we're not doing that. But in this
Mm.
case, he got his way, and we have both versions of the story can exist, and I think that it's a shame because
It's a disservice to both of them, I feel.
yeah,
It's trying to have its cake and eat it too.
and it
And
doesn't feel like a lost story then because that wouldn't have been in the original draft because if this happened, the Three Doctors wouldn't exist.
hmm, yeah, it tries to go a bit meta with it, but at the same time, it just felt a bit off to me. It felt a bit cack-handed in how it was handled at the end there.
Hmm.
Uh, but the first half I still love.
Yeah,
Particularly part two. It's bloody
yes.
brilliant.
Part two is brilliant. I love that we have the sort of with the doctors meeting the four horsemen in their own different ways, and I love
Hmm.
especially the
Joe
third.
Sheary doing a brilliant job as them.
Yeah, I think the third Doctor bit for me is great because I can picture this quarry, and you can picture the gun and the crash zoom on John's face as the scream of the closing theme comes in. That's great. I think should we talk about our Doctors within this because I think this is a testament to modern Big Finish, how lucky we are to have these three actors, and well, technically four with John Coleshaw,
Yeah,
portraying
these
these
recasts.
beloved characters.
Hmm. Mixing alongside Fraser Hines and Katie Manning seamlessly, really.
Mm. I mean,
Yeah,
Michael
I think,
Troughton and Fraser Hines, I think I had a lot of fun with those two because Operation Werewolf, like we said in our review, they were missing in the action together. They're front and
yeah,
center within this, and you have some wonderful one-liners. And Troughton's very bitchy to Jamie because
yeah,
I think Jamie's going to be a bit of a hindrance.
it's
It's
wonderful.
wonderful
I was like,
stuff.
that was a rhetorical question, Jamie. It's
Wonderful.
brilliant. Yeah. It is what was missing from Operation Werewolf. As fun as it was having those characters on their own separate journeys, doing their own things in that story, it's nice here having them together as well. And yeah, I think you could tell Michael and Fraser get on to. Yeah,
Which is
there is.
good. Which I think is an important thing for that dynamic. You have to have that connection.
Hmm. Yeah, it's something wonderful there. I mean, another brilliant dynamic that's sort of come out of left field is the First Doctor and the Brigadier, Stephen Noonan and John Coleshaw
Yeah,
here.
Brett of Iron.
I mean, that's something that definitely wouldn't have been in the original
Yeah, that
script
wouldn't have been
either.
mentioned at all.
Yeah, they work wonderfully together too. And I mean, Stephen Noonan always putting in a brilliant performance.
Uncanny. I think this was very like wow, 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 wow,
Mm.
wow. What I am hearing Bill Hartnell here.
Yeah, indeed. And John Coleshaw, like we say, is pretty much the lead of part one. And I think he rises to that wonderfully.
Mm.
And yeah, certainly it's one of the pros now of things being, a little bit different to how they would have been on TV, is that he does get treated a bit more seriously, I feel, the Brigadier. And
Yes.
there is a bit more emotion there as well. Yeah, and I mean with the Doctor and Jamie too. Like, had it been on TV, the third Doctor wouldn't have given a flying flip about Jamie.
Yeah, but there's
But
these nice little touching moments.
yeah, and I mean it pulls on the heartstrings again towards the end. Both this release and not Death World. This is Death World. Operation Werewolf. Sorry.
Mm.
Both like to twist that knife that the war game stabbed, shall we say?
Yes.
When it comes to Jamie and the Doctor. Yeah, it's funny getting that back-to-back releases. It does still. Yeah, you feel it still, even now.
Yeah, it's one of the saddest moments in classic Doctor Who.
For this release, say it's a brilliant first half. Like, honestly, at the end of part two, I was messaging you going, this might be one of my favorite releases of the year.
Mm.
And then the second half came along and it just, yeah, crumbled, I think, like you put it. And yeah, I think it's still reasonably high up there because of how much I love the first half.
I
But
think the characters make it. I think
hmm,
the work that all the actors have done for this story really sort of lift it. I think, especially in the second half, because the story might not be there to support it, but the actors are really lifting it, and the interactions are really what sells that latter half of the story.
yeah, I think which is often the case with multi-doctor stories,
Mm.
really. You're there for seeing those doctors interact. And for this release in particular, it's seeing the big three recasts, I suppose,
Yeah,
of Big Finish at the moment interacting with each other. And yeah, I think they all do a wonderful job. Yeah. I just wish the second half lived up to what the first half promised.
I think for me, there's some sort of element of coziness to it. It feels a bit like a comfort audio, this one, in a way.
Hmm.
Despite the flaws it
The
has,
dark, yeah, despite the darker nature of some stuff in part two.
it just feels like a weird blend of all of Doctor Who in one story. Because it's neither classic, it's neither new, it's in this kind of sweet spot,
Hmm. Neither
really.
sci-fi nor fantasy in a way.
Yeah, it's in its own little limbo area.
Yeah, it's
And
certainly different from the usual Third Doctor story.
yeah,
And I think Big Finish with the Third Doctor Ventures are very much going for that, recreating an era vibe. The music and sound effects are all very true to the
era.
70s, yeah, music. Here, it's not quite like that, but at the same time, the story's not quite like a Third Doctor story. So I think it works.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it is, I suppose, more a celebration of all three Doctors rather than just, not that the three Doctors is just the third, but you look at the three Doctors and it's very much a John Pertwee era story. You
Yes.
look at the five Doctors and it is more all-encompassing, I would say.
Mm. And I
Yeah,
think it's good to see and experience, all three doctors having a big part to play within this story, really.
yeah, particularly the first Doctor, because as we know, with three Doctors, William Hartnell's poor health prevented him from having that equal part.
Mm.
And so it's wonderful now that Stephen Noonan gets to carry that baton and, you know, go toe to toe with his other two incarnations. Yeah, and I think they really
Yeah.
do all bump each other up, really.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of upmanship within there trying to outdo each other.
Which just leads to them all coming out on top.
Yeah. If we were to give it a rating, see,
Yeah,
because I enjoyed the
7.
so much, I'd probably go. I'll go an 8.
I think I'll stick with a 7, but I will say part 2 is probably a 9 or a 10 on its
Yeah.
own. Part 1's a good 7 or an 8. I think, yeah. And then sadly, it does go downhill in parts 3 and 4. It was
Yeah.
a bit overlong as well, parts 3 and 4.
But I guess that is Deathworld. I guess half of it can stay in purgatory, the rest can be
Hmm.
free to roam across the cosmos.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation there of our feelings on Deathworld. Let us know what you thought of it down below. Did you enjoy the second half more than we did? Did you just like the first half?
Mm.
Yeah. Do you think it's all rubbish? Do you think it's all brilliant? Let us know down below, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.